There comes a time, beloved, when silence isn't surrender, it's sovereignty. When the loudest voice in the room is the one that says nothing at all, and yet everything changes because of it. There is a kind of silence that does not come from fear, nor from suppression, nor from indifference. It is not the silence of being unheard or overlooked. It is not the quiet imposed by oppression or shame. No, this silence is chosen. It is crafted. It is carved like a sculpture from the stone of discipline, of clarity, and of inner peace. It is a silence that wears a crown, not a muzzle. A silence that rules over noise, not one that bows before it. This, beloved, is sovereignty. Silence as sovereignty is not a retreat from the world, but a return to oneself. It is not the absence of voice, but the presence of depth. In this world of clamor, of 24-hour sirens and endless arguments, to be silent with intent is to be sovereign over your attention, your energy, and your response. It is to say, I will not give you all of me just because you demand it. I will not scatter my spirit across 1,000 meaningless exchanges. I will not barter my peace for participation in noise. We have been taught, especially in times of conflict, that the one who speaks first, who speaks fastest, who shouts loudest, is the one with power. But this is a lie dressed in urgency. Real power does not need to be broadcast. The strongest trees do not need to rustle their leaves to prove they are rooted. Silence, when it is true and whole, is a sign of mastery. It is the pause of a mind that has outgrown reaction. It is the stillness of a soul that does not need to chase affirmation because it is already in possession of self-certainty. When you stand in that kind of silence, the sovereign kind, you are not withholding. You are reigning, you are not ignoring, you are choosing, you are not disconnected, you are deeply, profoundly aware. So aware that you no longer feel the need to spill yourself into every room just to be seen. Silence is sovereignty because it reclaims space. It says, I do not need to fill the air with words to be present. I do not need to explain myself to earn my existence. I do not need to answer every beckoning hand that reaches for a piece of my soul. There is great dignity in silence. It is the language of those who have seen too much, felt too deeply, and chosen, not bitterness, but balance. It is the expression of someone who understands the power of restraint, who knows that to pause before you speak is to give birth to words that matter. In that quiet, you hear things others miss, the tremble of your own intuition, the echo of wisdom too ancient to be hurried, the clarity that only comes when the world's noise has been dimmed to a whisper. The sovereign silent one is not aloof. No, they are awake. They are not distant. They are discerning. They are watching, not to judge, but to understand. They are listening, not just to others, but to the rhythm of their own being. And from that place of silent sovereignty, they walk through storms without being moved. They do not explain themselves to chaos. They do not perform their pain. They do not enter every battle that invites them. They understand that sometimes the highest power is found not in what you say, but in what you refuse to say, in the calm, collected grace of choosing not to engage in the fire, but to hold your own flame sacred and untouched. There is something almost sacred about restraint, something divine in the decision to speak less, especially in a world that is constantly pushing us to speak more, share more, declare more, perform more. Speaking less is not about invisibility. It is about the cultivation of presence. It is the art of becoming more by doing less, of going inward instead of outward, of understanding that the self does not expand through noise, but through nurtured stillness. Every word we speak is an energy we release, and when we do not speak carelessly, we begin to understand just how powerful that energy truly is. Speaking less is not silence born of fear. It is silence born of knowing. knowing that our words are not required for our worth, knowing that our essence is not dependent on our explanation, knowing that being heard is not always the same as being understood, and that being understood begins, first and foremost, with understanding ourselves. When we speak less, we start to listen more, not just to others, but to the voices inside ourselves that are often drowned out by our need to respond, react, or be seen. We begin to notice the small shifts in our spirit, the subtle movements of thought that go unnoticed in the rush of constant conversation. In that stillness, we begin to gather ourselves back. We begin to remember who we are when no one else is watching, when no one else is prompting, when no one else is asking us to explain. The less we speak, the more we hear the music of our own minds, the poetry of our own breath, the slow unfolding wisdom of our own becoming. There is a fullness that comes with that kind of quiet. It fills you up in ways applause cannot. It roots you in a place where you no longer feel the need to be always on, always talking, always visible. You begin to radiate, not broadcast. There is a myth that says, if you do not speak, you will disappear. But the truth is, the more we fill our mouths with words, the more we sometimes empty our hearts of meaning. When we speak constantly, we often scatter ourselves. We give away fragments without knowing if anyone is gathering them. But when we speak less, we begin to gather ourselves inward, like water returning to a well, deepening, cooling, becoming still. And from that stillness, something greater rises. Clarity, presence, strength, and a beauty that no noise can duplicate. We learn to sit with our discomfort without rushing to explain it. We learn to carry our stories without always placing them on display. We learn to hold space for our pain without needing others to witness it in order for it to be valid. That is how we become more, by realizing we were already whole, even before we spoke a single word. Speaking less teaches us patience. It teaches us precision. It teaches us to wait for the right moment, the necessary moment, the moment when what we say is not just heard, but felt. Our voices become richer, not louder, because every word we do speak carries the weight of intention, of consideration, of depth. People begin to lean in rather than pull away. They begin to sense that behind our quiet is not vacancy, but vastness, a mind that is thoughtful, a spirit that is grounded, a heart that beats, not for performance, but for purpose. And so we begin to walk through the world with less need to explain and more power in simply being. We begin to recognize that transformation does not always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it waits, sometimes it watches, and in that space between speech and silence, between restraint and revelation, we become more than we ever imagined. There is a craving in the world today, a deep, unrelenting hunger that has nothing to do with food and everything to do with attention. It is not nourishment the world seeks, not wisdom, not truth in its fullness. What it wants is reaction, quick, instant, fiery reaction. The world has become addicted to urgency, addicted to stimulation, addicted to the spark that leaps out before understanding ever walks in the room. And everywhere you turn, you are being asked to react to news, to insults, to gossip, to headlines dressed as facts, to distractions parading as duty. Every screen, every platform, every conversation is a lit match waiting for you to become the flame. It tells you, speak now or be forgotten. Show anger or be unseen. Show outrage or be irrelevant. But what it does not tell you, what it hopes you never realize, is that your reaction is not always your truth. And if you give it away too freely, too often, you lose more than your peace. You lose your center. The world will hand you provocation like candy, sweetened with controversy, designed to pull you out of your calm and into its chaos. It will tempt you to argue, to post, to scream, to clap back, to prove yourself, not for the sake of justice, not for the sake of healing, but for the sake of entertainment. And in doing so, it steals from you something precious. It steals the sacred pause. That pause where reflection lives. That pause where dignity breathes. That pause where you might have chosen wisdom instead of impulse, grace instead of retaliation, stillness instead of spectacle. But the world is not patient. It does not want you to consider. It wants you to consume. It does not want you to feel deeply, only to feel fast. There is a performance that the world demands of you, and to be constantly available, constantly expressive, constantly inflamed. It makes you believe that silence is weakness, that measured response is avoidance, that peace is passivity. And so people learn to react before they understand, to speak before they think, to choose noise over knowing. But beneath the surface of all this reaction, what lingers is emptiness. Because when everything becomes a performance, very little becomes real. When every thought is tailored for effect, truth becomes diluted. When every feeling is packaged for consumption, authenticity is lost. And so the world's hunger grows because it cannot be satisfied with spectacle. It cannot be fulfilled with frenzy. It will always come back for more and more and more until you are emptied of yourself and filled with only echoes of what others expected you to be. To refuse this hunger, to not feed it with your reaction, is a kind of resistance. It is a way of saying, I will not dance for your amusement. I will not fight to prove my humanity. I will not trade my inner world for your fleeting attention. It is to reclaim your time, your thoughts, your emotions, your voice. It is to understand that not every call must be answered. Not every argument deserves your breath. Not every slight needs a reply. To hold yourself back, to sit inside your own clarity before you let the world pull you in every direction. That is a radical act in these times. Because it is easy to be loud, it is easy to be reactive. What takes courage is to stand still while the fire burns around you and to know that you are not made to be consumed by it. What takes wisdom is to recognize that your power does not lie in how quickly you respond, but in how deeply you choose. What takes grace is to hear the noise, to feel the tug, to sense the provocation, and still decide to remain sovereign within yourself. There is a strength that does not announce itself. It does not come with clenched fists or loud declarations. It does not posture or parade. It does not walk into a room and demand to be seen. No, this strength moves quietly like a river beneath the surface, like roots growing deep into the earth. It begins where the world cannot see, in the soft folds of the inner life, in the still spaces between thought and breath. This strength is not built in the noise of applause or the rush of reaction. It is built in the silence we carry within. Inner silence is not emptiness. It is not absence. It is a presence so full, so settled, that it no longer needs to prove itself. It is the calm center of the storm, the breath that holds steady while everything else shakes. It is the part of us that remains rooted when the world tilts and the winds rise. When you begin to tend to that silence, not as something to escape from, but as something to return to, you begin to realize how much of your life has been lived in reaction to noise that was never yours. The noise of expectations, of judgments, of projections, of comparisons. The endless commentary that tells you who you should be, how you should speak, how you should feel, and what it means to be strong. But true strength does not live in the performance. It lives in the restraint. It lives in the ability to hear all that noise and not let it enter your spirit. It lives in the quiet refusal to be moved by every wind. in the sacred choice to sit still with yourself when everything around you is screaming for your attention. Inner silence is not the absence of feeling. It is the holding of feeling with grace. It is the willingness to be with yourself, to face your own fears, your own griefs, your own longings, without distraction, without distortion, without needing to speak them into existence just to make them real. From this inner silence, a new kind of strength is born. Not the brittle strength that cracks under pressure, but the supple, enduring strength that bends and sways and returns to center. This strength cannot be stolen because it was not given by the world in the first place. It does not rely on titles, on praise, on visibility, or validation. It is the strength of someone who knows who they are even when no one is watching. Someone who is not defined by their reactions, but by their resolve. Someone who does not need to speak to be heard, whose presence is a language of its own. Inner silence becomes outer strength when you stop trying to convince the world of your worth and start living from a place where your worth is unquestionable. It becomes outer strength when you no longer chase peace in external circumstances, but carry it within you like a compass, steady and unshaken. This kind of strength shows itself in the way you walk away from what does not serve you without bitterness, in the way you choose not to defend yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, in the way you remain kind in a world that mistakes cruelty for power, in the way you forgive without forgetting who you are. It is a strength that shows up in restraint, in dignity, in the pauses between your words. It is the strength of the one who carries fire but does not need to burn everything in their path to prove they are lit. It is the strength of one who has met themselves in the silence and found someone worth trusting, someone worth honoring, someone who no longer fights to be strong, because they have already become it in the quiet. There are moments in life when silence is not absence, but resistance, when the refusal to speak is not retreat, but rebellion, when withholding your voice from the noise around you is not a sign of defeat, but of power too dignified to perform. Silence, when chosen deliberately, becomes a kind of protest, not against speaking itself, but against the demands that you explain, justify, defend, and diminish yourself just to be granted a seat at the table. This world is built on demands. It demands your attention. It demands your reaction. It demands your energy. And above all, it demands that you participate in its rhythm, even when that rhythm is reckless, violent, chaotic, or shallow. But to go still, to be quiet on purpose in a society built on noise, is to push back against the machinery. It is to say, I will not perform for you. I will not fight your battles to prove I exist. I will not bleed on command just because you hunger for spectacle. When you refuse to explain your pain to those who mock it, that is rebellion. When you choose not to argue your humanity with those who have decided they cannot see it, that is rebellion. When you withhold your brilliance, your insight, your spirit from spaces that have not earned your trust, that is not cowardice. That is clarity. There is a kind of freedom in deciding that your voice is sacred and not everyone is entitled to it. The world may call you distant, cold, indifferent, arrogant, but what they are really reacting to is your refusal to be consumed. Silence, when practiced with intention, is the act of reclaiming your inner territory. It is choosing not to be colonized by chaos, not to be taken hostage by every provocation that passes your way. It is looking at the fire they set for you and refusing to be the fuel. So often, silence is misunderstood. They think you have nothing to say, when really you have learned that not everything deserves a response. They think you are disengaged, when really you are deeply in tune, just no longer willing to squander your peace for empty validation. Silence becomes rebellion when you recognize that constantly defending yourself is its own kind of prison. You do not need to argue in every room to know you belong in it. You do not need to match the volume of injustice with rage if that rage costs you your balance. You do not need to prove your depth to people who cannot swim. And in this realization, something powerful rises, a quiet that cannot be coerced, a stillness that refuses to be moved. In a culture addicted to speed and noise, choosing silence is revolutionary. It is radical to take your time when everything around you is demanding urgency. It is radical to be thoughtful when the world rewards reaction. It is radical to keep your truth safe in your chest until it is ready, not for their consumption, but for your liberation. That silence is not passive. It is not weak. It is a strategy. It is protection. It is preparation. And more than that, it is a declaration. I am not here to entertain. I am not here to convince. I am not here to explain my soul to those who want only to dissect it. My silence is not your victory. It is not a void to be filled. It is a wall. It is a boundary. It is a drumbeat beneath the surface that says, I will speak when it matters, and not a moment sooner. There is a certain reverence that must accompany the use of words, a certain stillness that should rise before speech, a silence that listens inward before anything outward is ever spoken. In a world where language is so often thrown like dust into the wind, fleeting, careless, performative, to choose your words with purpose is an act of great discipline and even greater love, not only for others, but for yourself, because every word you speak carries weight, and that weight either builds or breaks. It either plants or pierces. It either heals or harms. And what a powerful thing it is to know that you hold within your mouth a force strong enough to move hearts or silence them. To be aware of that power and not abuse it, that is wisdom. To use it only when it matters, that is grace. We live in a time where people speak because silence feels too uncomfortable. They speak to fill gaps, to soothe nerves, to feel relevant. And yet, the more we speak without care, the more we dilute our voice. When every thought becomes public, when every moment demands a caption, when every emotion is broadcast before it is even understood, something sacred is lost. The weight of words diminishes. Their edge becomes dull. But when we begin to choose our words with purpose, when we give them space, when we let them marinate in reflection before offering them to the world, then those words arrive not as noise, but as nourishment. They come dressed in truth, not performance. They come to build bridges, not burn them. They come to bless, not impress. And people can feel that difference. To choose your words with purpose is to honor the power of speech. It is to know that language is not just a tool of expression, but of creation. What we say shapes the world around us. It shapes the way we are perceived, the way others are received, and the way stories are remembered. A single sentence can open a heart or shut one down. A single phrase, spoken in haste, can linger for years in the soul of another, growing like a wound or like a balm. That is why the elders often said, "Speak only if your words are more beautiful than your silence." Not because silence is always best, but because silence, when held with intention, teaches us what matters. And from that space, our words emerge not to dominate the moment, but to serve it. This is not about censorship. It is not about walking on verbal eggshells or fearing expression. It is about intentionality, about knowing when to speak and why. It is about understanding that not everything that can be said needs to be said, and not every truth must be shouted to be known. There is a courage and restraint, a strength in being deliberate, a wisdom in asking yourself, what is the purpose of what I'm about to say? Who will it lift? What will it teach? Will it deepen or divide? These questions are not burdens. They are blessings because they slow us down. They bring our speech into alignment with our values. They make our words carry the rhythm of our soul, not just the noise of our emotions. And when people hear you speak from that place, that grounded, thoughtful, intentional place, they feel the difference. You no longer speak to be heard. You speak to be understood. You speak to reveal, not to react. You speak to offer light, even when the subject is heavy. You speak to protect your peace and extend it to others. You speak not to overpower, but to empower. And your words, chosen with care, become not only expressions of thought, but extensions of your character. They become mirrors of your spirit, your integrity, your awareness.